Hi, this is Atle Schekkeland, President of the Digital Value Institute. I'm joined today by Alan Pelz Sharpe, Founder and Principal Analyst of Deep Analysis. I have to say I've known Alan for years, and I consider him one of the smartest tech analysts in the industry. So thank you for joining us, Alan.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
So jumping straight into the questions here I had for you is that in this digital age where customers are, some people are talking about click-to-brick customers, you also talk about new millennials, that actually is no way they're going to a bank branch, for example. They have to be digital engagement. So based on your work, what do you see hinders organization from better serving customers in the digital age, and what are the barriers and how do you overcome those barriers? Any tips you have for us?
Lots of tips and lots of observations. I don't know if they're all good ones though, but they are drawn from the real world. So, it's one of the things we really do try to do at Deep Analysis is talk as often as we possibly can to people who actually use and buy technology, right? Because you can so easily get caught up in this little technology bubble of sort of the virtual bubble of people telling each other that, the world's going to be run by AI and everything's going to go on the blockchain. So in the real world, I think some of it's quite simple and some of it's quite complex. But the principles are all simple. One of them is that today, customer experience, CX, whatever, digital customer experience, digital citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a hot topic, and that's a good thing because it's brought it into focus. However, most organizations, be they in the public or the private sector, are completely overwhelmed with requests and ideas and thoughts and strategies as to how they move forward. And I think that's the biggest hindrance, frankly, is where on earth do you start? And what you see people doing is starting with things like, we're going to do multi-channels. Let's get on Twitter, let's get on Facebook, let's update the website, let's do this, let's do that. And I would argue that's really not the place to start. Don't worry too much about that. I'd say there's two things you need to do. One is to embrace the idea of journey maps. And journey maps have been around a long time, but in my experience, frankly, most people are not familiar with them. I mean, basically, you have to sit down and just say, let's forget the technology. Let's forget all of that for a second. What does a customer actually do when they engage with us? And just map that whole thing out. And I'm a big believer in that because my roots really are in process management. So, I like to see a flow chart. But I think people are put off. They think this is a big job. And it's really not. I mean, you can get a team of people around a table, and in a couple of hours, you'll have a pretty decent first stab at a journey map. Why do that? Because it's like switching the lights on. It's like, oh, okay. And 9 times out of 10, not scientific, not backed up by any research, but 9 times out of 10, 91.6% of the time, I would say, what people will find is that there's some really basic things they can do straight away to start improving that customer experience. And the number one thing is absolutely journey mapping, starting to understand what it is your customer actually does and what they actually want and how they interact with you. Then, almost like at the other end of the spectrum, the other thing to do is to start looking, where is my data? Where is my customer data? Do I have access to it? If I did have access to it, would I be able to make any kind of sense of it? And again, it's like switching a light on, because suddenly you think, we've got all of this stuff somewhere, but I really have no idea exactly where or how to access it or do anything with it. So if you start at one end, at the touchy-feely end, right, which is your journey map, how does a customer actually interact with us? And if you start at the real hardcore data end at the same time, in parallel, I think that's a great way to start. I don't think you do one before the other. I think you do them in parallel, but I think that's a great way to start. So that's sort of, two high-level tips, if you like.
And so how what are the next steps in that journey? How do you combine those two initiatives? You start with journey mapping, in parallel that you try to identify where my data is. Is it then to define what is your master data to ensure that information can flow? So if somebody contacts you in support, you have the same view as actually whatever channel they use to touch you in the future, that's you're able to serve them and you know what they've been doing in other places. Just tell us a little bit more. How do you go from those two activities to the next level to actually provide value?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I'm just I try to be anyway, a real pragmatist. And I've learnt the hard way. I mean, I've been an industry analyst and advisor for a very long time. And I was absolutely one of those people who jumped onto every technology trend and, you need to do this and you need to do that. And then you get into the real world again and you find out, they'd like to do that, but that's just not going to happen, right? I mean, you've got the cultural thing, right? And I mean, it's probably a big topic for another big conversation, but let's be honest, what's the biggest hindrance to companies from serving their customers better? That's culture. I mean, that's absolutely culture. In a really powerful customer-centric culture, everybody in your organization is recognized and loved and appreciated, and we all recognize this is a big team effort, from the receptionist and the cleaner to the CEO, whatever. Yeah, just not really like that, though, is it, in the real world? So, that I can't fix very quickly. But to your question about the data and the journey mapping, I think the data thing, I think it's basically you're trying to get a parallel track here. What can I do in the short term? And what can I do in the long term? So it's good to have that long-term ambition and big strategy. That's terrific. But it's going to take you a long time to get there. That's just reality. There is no AI tool you can plug in today and it will magically transform everything. That's just nonsense. But with your journey map, you typically, in fact, I'd say almost always actually, you'll typically find out there are some really basic things. So we've just been doing some research on citizen services. And it's quite remarkable when you look at what can be fixed very quickly. And 9 times out of 10, again, I keep using this term 9 times out of 10, not scientific, just making it up, but very, very often. It's really something like, that form is really difficult to fill in.
Yeah.
Or to your point, we've got 3 different versions of their address and there's inconsistency. Or there's manual handoffs. So, it looks all great on the screen. And then it says, thanks for your message. We'll get back to you in a few days' time because now we're going to do a manual handoff. You can't fix all of those overnight, but by doing that journey map, you might well find the one point that really gets up everybody's back, right? And it's often a very, very straightforward fix. It's not that complex.
And you said also about critical success factor being culture, and there's no really shortcuts, perhaps, of fixing the culture. But is it then, taking your first point about journey mapping, is one way to get people to change the culture is to focus on the customer, building on what you said, perhaps drawing up what's the life in a future customer, how they should be engaged with this? Is it some visuals or so? Is that the way to change the culture? Or you have other recommendation of how to actually move the culture and change the culture?
I think it's a good start. I think it's a good start because it's like any kind of process mapping. It's not something people do very much these days, but it always reveals the most amazing things that you didn't know were there, right? I mean, very often in process mapping, you find out that there's an activity that's costing you a lot of time and a lot of money, and it serves absolutely no value whatsoever, right? So that sort of exercise, I think, is always valuable. But for the first time, most likely, in your organization, you'll now have a unified understanding of how you actually interact with customers and what they're looking for. And I think that alone is a big step to change. But again, I have to be realistic here. I mean, I just don't know how many head offices and companies I've been in over the course of my career. I've probably been in 10 in the last couple of weeks, actually. And the moment you step through that door, you get a feeling. And, I'm just being frank. I mean, there's some companies you step in, you think, well, this place is pretty, people are happy here. This is efficient. You just pick it up. You're a human being. And there are other places where you think, well, this is a miserable place. I really would not want to work here or spend any longer than I need. And those kind of issues, that's a whole change management discussion. It's a psychology, group dynamics, whatever.
So,
and I'm a big believer in just walking away sometimes in those situations because I can't fix that.
So final thoughts or final recommendation, because I know we all like shortcuts, but it seems like what you talked about, journey mapping, and also then look at where is my data and information about the customer is the right way. Anything you want to add as a last remark for companies to start focusing on?
I think so, because I mean, what I've really talked about here is some real basics of making some quick fixes and understanding where you're at. But I do believe you should have very ambitious goals. The technology, machine learning, AI in particular, they offer an enormous amount of promise. And those tools are actually way more advanced and sophisticated today than people realize. The issue is, without good data, they can't do anything. So identifying that data and starting that work. I mean, there's an interesting thing. When we think about what a data scientist is, if we're going to hire a data scientist for an AI initiative, well, A, we think they're really expensive, which they probably are. B, we think they probably graduate from Stanford or MIT and they've got a PhD, which is also quite possible. But you know what? They spend 80% of their time finding and cleaning up data. Like, that's really the core job. And if you don't even know where it is, you're not going to do anything, right? But that job can get started real early. And it's really remarkable what you can do. But until you do that housekeeping work, all the AI in the world isn't going to help you.
So excellent recommendation. Really nice talking to you, Alan. Thank you again for joining us and have a lovely day.
Good to speak to you as always. You too.